Hi, everybody. I felt that was a 1, I have to say, as you heard my name. But then I consoled myself thinking that a number 1 was better than a number 2 when you heard my name. So yeah, good to see you all. It's an absolute pleasure to be chairing this session, which I think begins to explore one of the absolutely fundamental issues for the future of social prescribing about how are we going to finance this, and how can we finance a system that operates across so many different areas that there isn't an existing system in place. So what do we need to build to ensure that patients are able to access the best services for them, and to ensure that the voluntary organisations and charities, which I think are too often expected to build bricks without straw, how do we make sure that they get the funding that they need to deliver the services that are essential to social prescribing happening? So I've got a brilliant panel here who's going to help us explore these issues from a lot of different angles, so many angles that we're just going to have a little snapshot from each of them about how they are seeing this happening. But without further ado, I'm going to let them just introduce themselves, giving their names and what their job is, and then we'll get on with the discussion. So I'm Sarah Metcalfe. I'm Managing Director of the Utley Foundation, and I'm also a NASP trustee. And starting at this end.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Murphy. I'm the Health and Social Care Strategy Lead at the Money and Pensions Service. It's my job really to try and get financial well-being.
We claim this, that it was invented in Stockport. The first scheme started there, and it was a partnership between the council's culture department and public health. And that's how I first came in as an artist working on that. And since then, our organisation has basically invented and reinvented a huge number of programmes with adults and young people that address mental health needs. So we work in partnership with health services. Our main core service is a referral in programme, and it always has been, whether it was called social prescribing or not. We've always struggled to get GPs referrals, to be honest, because GPs never had the time. So a lot of our referrals would come from community mental health teams, early intervention teams, the DWP, support workers. And then adults and young people are referred into the programmes. We do a range of creative projects with them, and then we try to signpost on to other services and local groups if we can. Some people move into volunteering and even into facilitation through that. In terms of the funding challenges, our funding portfolio is very, very broad, as any charity will say it is, and it's a constant struggle. I am quite a lot short for April's budget, as always, and it's a mixture of charitable trusts, things like the lottery, obviously, a huge range of charitable trusts that we're constantly on that hamster wheel of funding applications, which is a real issue in terms of being able to provide a sustainable and sustained support service to our participants, and also be able to reassure people that that we will still be there next year when social prescribers come to us in their hundreds at the moment with people. And actually, I think, well, I can't guarantee I've got the budget to program all the things because we haven't got all the bids in and some of them have been rejected and we've got to go apply again. But the reason I think I was invited to talk was also because the one constant that we've had always is support from what was our local CCG, which is now part of the integrated care system in Greater Manchester. So Stockport CCG, they don't commission us as such. They've given us a grant. We've had a very clear agreement and we report on that every year. And it's not that we're guaranteed to have it. It tends to come in 3-year batches, but we always have. And we've got an amazing relationship with those health commissioners. They totally understand the valuable role that the arts provision can play in people's mental health. It's not the nice little add-on extra. It's fundamental to people feeling that they're growing in confidence, that they're connecting with people, that their voice is being heard, that whole self-efficacy. And so I feel incredibly lucky that we've got brilliant relationships, and I constantly spend time every week or every month investing in those relationships with the CCG, with the local authority, with making sure that everybody in any aspect, any sector in Stockport and now Greater Manchester knows the value of what we do, the cost of what we do, how we measure our impact, how we can report to them.
One question I have, Jacqui, is there any connection between the referrals that you get and your funding?
No. So we have, in the last 3 months, our referrals have doubled, literally. We've just been doing all the end of year stats, so I know that. And the amount we get from health, which I am eternally grateful for, obviously hasn't increased for 15 years, literally hasn't increased 15 years. So it's not person dependent. It's great because they see it as a valuable, I suppose what's great is they see the role that the arts can play and our project can play in the mental health pathway that is available in our locality. So that's really valuable. But yeah, you're right, it's not social prescribing is really working in GM, really working in Stockport. It's great. What are we going to do with all those people? Well, the fact that I have 50 people to see before our next lot of courses start, I don't have the support workers available to meet them.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. I've made a note. I think that brings us actually quite interestingly on, Julie, to what is going on in Greater Manchester. And it's an unusual role. That's not, I think, is it potentially a unique role that you have. I'm just wondering if you could tell us what funding models you're beginning to think about and develop for Greater Manchester.
Yeah, so from the perspective of the two parts of my current work, so creative health and how we embed creative health across health and social care systems, and that includes social prescribing but isn't exclusively social prescribing, and then Live Well, which is, I suppose, what you would call a holistic approach to social prescribing. So it goes far beyond the link worker role and looks at the role of communities and embedding health and well-being approaches and person-centered approaches. And also feel like a bit of a fraud because my colleague Charlotte, who is the lead for social prescribing for Greater Manchester, is out there somewhere. Right? So, and there she is, yeah, and is doing an amazing job. So I'm talking from not from the social prescribing lead role, but from Live Well and Creative Health. There's we don't have the answer. Of course, we don't have the answer because if I did, I'd be multiplying myself by 100 and flying around everywhere. There's no single solution. I think it's partly about scaling and replicating what we have, and that seems to be the situation that we're in at the moment, particularly as we all know we're in a situation of immense pressure. The system is under huge stress. Everyone who works in that system is under huge stress, so it's how do we make the most of what we've got. We were talking backstage, and I think we're going to carry on talking about during this session about how collaboration and joint funding is key. And for creative health, I can lever in support. I can potentially lever in funding from partners such as Arts Council, National Heritage Lottery Fund, but that isn't sustainable. And we have to be able to match that with funding from inside the system and then get the right data systems in place to be able to evidence the financial and the social value of our work. And that then we need to think about primary care and secondary care. And we are we're talking about how can we work with our secondary care colleagues to really make the case and the financial value of what we do, particularly in terms of prevention. But we're never going to be able to say, okay, you've saved money, you can close that ward now, so give us the money for prevention. It's not ever going to work like that, and no one's ever going to get to the bottom of a waiting list. So it's like, how do we have those conversations? I think data is key. I have not got a data background, but I'm finding it's increasingly part of my everyday job to understand with health inequalities, to understand where resources are best placed, and also to start looking at outcomes, really hard evidence. But when it comes to working with creative health, we can back that up with stories, because there's one thing the creative sector is really good at, and that is telling people's stories and helping people to tell their own stories. So I think we've got a unique opportunity in that sector to create a really compelling case. And we're working with partners, University of Manchester, for example, on a number of different projects looking at the role of data, and also how we make those data platforms accessible to our voluntary sector colleagues. So when I include culture sector, when I say voluntary sector, but we have to make a good case to them as to why they'd want to give us their data, why they want to potentially double entry, because they've got their own recording systems and their own data systems, and they need to report to funders that are nothing to do, not connected to us in any way. So what can we give them back in exchange for that data, and how we can help them? And that's a conversation we're having. We're doing some research with them at the moment about that.
Thank you very much. I think that draws out a number of really important points. I think that data and evidence, gathering that information, reflects very much what Charlotte Osborne Ford was saying this morning in her opening remarks. And I'm hearing you say that we can leverage funding in from partnership. Partnership funding is the way forward, but it's also about connecting those partnerships into the system itself, so that primary and secondary care partners are feeling that they're getting advantage or benefit from it, and it is connected into that money flow and funding system. I think that's a very helpful beginning point, but I'd like to bring you in now, Sarah, from the Money and Pensions Service, just for a broader perspective on the financial issues around building a sustainable social prescribing future.
Yeah, thanks. So I guess I'm coming at this from a slightly different angle or viewpoint. We know that the people that link workers, and then the organisations like yours, Jacqui, that are helping those people come with a whole range of different issues, but money problems probably is included within that for the majority. And there's loads of evidence out there about the links between health, including mental health, and money. But we know from research done at the Money and Pension Service that about 81% of people across the UK avoid talking about money. It's awkward, it's embarrassing, they feel ashamed. So we think that social prescribing in its entirety has a really unique opportunity to play in terms of improving financial well-being for those individuals. From the link workers themselves, being able to spend the time and have those what matters to me conversations puts you in a unique position to have that trust, build that trust, and to perhaps tease out where there might be a money issue, and hopefully get someone to the right source of support if you can. But in terms then of those activities, the organisations, the services that you're wanting to link that person into, are there any unintentional barriers, financial related barriers to that person then being able to engage with that service? So I think we heard from Sam on the previous panel around travel. You know, can someone actually afford to get to one of the activities that you're wanting to signpost them to? Do they need to pay to take part in an activity? Would they need any special equipment? You know, do they need arts and crafts and materials? Might they need a warm coat or you know, suitable shoes if they're doing something outside in a green space? So I think we're concerned with also that element of any unintentional financial barriers to be able to access those services. And I guess a question around, is that thought about when those services are being designed or developed, and how can a service become sustainable? Because sometimes funders will look to say, okay, here's some funding, but we want you to look at other models for sustainability. Does that involve charging a person? You know, how can these services still be equitable when the people accessing them might be coming with different experiences and different financial challenges?
That's such an interesting and important point, I think the idea that financial well-being is an integral part of social prescription, that at an individual level, but also that those organizations providing services that people are being referred to need support almost to poverty proof that what they're providing, and that needs to become part of a financial or a funding system, that ensuring that the services that are provided are accessible. It's such an important perspective, I think. I'm going to turn now, Sophie, to you from the lottery, who obviously is the absolute bedrock of funding in the UK. And I'm sure these are not new themes to you. It would just be interesting to hear where the lottery is thinking about these themes of social prescribing and financial barriers and joining funding up across different streams.
Yep, so I speak from one lottery distributor perspective, the National Lottery Community Fund. We're going through a strategic renewal at the moment, but we will definitely continue to focus on health and support for health. And we have always funded, I think it's fair to say, social prescribing. And what I'm hearing coming across is really interesting, is that focus on collaboration, that focus on sustainability, and also just picking up on what you said, Sarah, it's about co-production and co-design. We don't know these things. We don't know about travel, about the poverty proofing. So that's why it's so important that any activities and services are co-designed, but most importantly, that organizations and communities are funded to co-design. I think for a long time, the voluntary and community sector was providing a lot of additional activity unfunded. And I think we're now realizing all the different elements that are required for a successful social prescribing system. And I think from that, we need to think about what we fund, how we fund, and who we fund. So what we fund at the National Lottery Community Fund, lottery players' money is mainly the activities from social prescribing. But we're aware that we're not funding necessarily the link workers. We are funding some community connector schemes, but we're not funding them consistently. So there's a real mismatch. We fund in a very responsive way, but there is a potential for us to be more strategic about how we do it. And then that's how we fund. So rather than funding on our own, thinking about collaboration, and I know Jim is obviously going to talk more about that, but it's really, really important for us to champion the role of the voluntary and community sector and to look about how we can put our funding together with others in a place. And when I say others, I don't just mean health sector funding, local business, for example, philanthropy, smaller foundations, all of those things. If we had a shared investment pot, potentially that would be a more sustainable source for social prescribing, not just the activities, but the wraparound, the focus on health inequalities, the co-design from communities, and the ways in which people can access those services. So that, of course, is a wonderful, wonderful ambition. How easy is it to achieve? We don't know yet. We know, excuse me, it is happening in different places. It's being trialed. And it's something we're really, really interested in exploring. And just the last bit, sort of the who we fund, and again, I think that was touched on here as well. It's really, really important that we recognise that the voluntary sector isn't set up to just receive referrals, and that there may be barriers to accessing those services, and there may not even be services in places. So that's when that community co-design comes in as well, and the real focus on health inequalities and looking at the gaps and how we can understand that through data and evidence, but also through what we're hearing.
I think that's really encouraging, that idea of shared investment is at the heart of thinking, and it seems to make sense in a sector or in a new world of social prescribing, which does bring in so many different silos, and the idea of shared investment. But I think that's a very interesting point about the importance of co-design with community members and the organisations themselves. And I know that that is an area that NASP has been working in. At the Utley Foundation, we have recently started a shared investment project with NASP around getting the Power of Music Fund funding for music projects, and that is in development at the moment. And the idea of a shared investment fund, I can see, makes a lot of sense in the social prescribing world. It does, though, depend on collaboration from people who may speak different languages or jargon, or people who are coming from very different perspectives of the same problem. So I'm going to turn now to Jim, who is not just from the Association of Charitable Foundations, which is a very important organisation for this idea of shared investment, but he's actually head of the Collaborators Hub. So he's something of an expert on collaboration. The hub's been going for a year now, and it would be useful, I think, just to hear what the lessons are that you've picked up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the origins of the hub really came about through the pandemic and the recognition that funders needed to work differently. They needed to work much more connectedly to make best use of their funds. And actually, I think this is the continuation of a trend amongst grant makers that I've seen for over a decade, actually, as there's that sense that needs have been growing, resources have felt more scarce. Every funder feels that responsibility to make their resources go as far as possible and work as effectively as possible. And I think I'm seeing that coming about in a few different ways. I think you're talking about sustainability. I think that funders have evolved their kind of prevailing mindset around like what will achieve sustainability for the kind of voluntary community sector since I started working in the sector, when, you know, there was this idea that you could fund some innovation for a few years and then it would sort of get picked up by statutory and they would fund it. And, you know, I think that model seemed to have died under austerity. But actually, I think what we're seeing now is foundations recognizing that they're a long-term part of the funding mix for like most areas of charitable and community work, but they need to work alongside statutory funding. They need to work alongside community groups' own kind of enterprising approaches to generating their income, and recognizing that actually if these different sort of types of funding can figure out what their best role each is within a context of a local range of activities, then it can be so much more effective. But the challenge, of course, is how do these different sorts of funding organizations kind of really understand each other's worlds? Is there still a bit of a kind of cultural, like a language divide between how public services talk and how independent, like private foundations talk and think? So I think through the hub, what I've seen is broadly collaboration pointing in two complementary directions. So there's been a lot of talk about like shared investment, and there's a real place, particularly with an opportunity like we have with social prescribing, to really shift how things are done on a national scale. You need some people to get together and see that kind of big strategic picture and work out how you can collectively influence and combine resources to do something at large scale. And that's great. And there are some trusts and foundations that really love to kind of get involved in that systemic side of things. But at the same time, you know, it's a really diverse landscape out there. And I know that comes with challenges because there are hundreds of thousands of different funders that all do things slightly differently, all have a slightly different reason why they're there doing that. And, you know, you talk about the hamster wheel. I mean, I used to be a grants fundraiser before I crossed the fence, and I absolutely recognize the hamster wheel of trying to get your budget together from all these different sources. I think funders recognize that and are starting to try and resolve some of that and work a bit more flexibly and efficiently. But fundamentally, there are benefits to this like very, very diverse landscape of funders. And there's a danger that if everyone goes in together and funders move as a pack and kind of all do one big strategic collective thing together, like what gets lost? What are the sort of opportunity costs of that? So I think that there's also a side of collaboration which is a bit more informal, a bit kind of softer, and actually it's just about mutual awareness, like funders being better connected and seeing that they do exist as part of an ecosystem. They do need to understand that if they have this particular niche that is the thing that they do and that's what they're set up to do or what they decide to focus on, that's fine, but don't just arrive at that like haphazardly. Arrive at it because you've understood what others are doing around you. And that's why I think through the hub, being able to bring together information on all the different national, local, regional networks, funders getting together to talk about all the different issues they fund, and then noticing that actually there are overlaps and intersections between these issues too, and realizing that actually with each of their limited resources, they can make better decisions about how to target that because they kind of understand what others are doing around them. I think when you want a community sector to flourish and be sustainably funded between all these different sources of funding that there are, having that combination of like the bigger strategic kind of working together and the sort of light touch, just, you know, calibrating our individual streams of funding around what we know about what everyone else is doing. I think that will ultimately mean that the community activity can be funded as well and sustainably as it can, recognizing that we can't just create more money, so we do have to use what we've got as effectively as possible.
I think that's a really sensible cautionary note about thinking that the answer is all about shared investment, that if you do that, you lose the nuance, both of the fantastic funders that are really interested in perhaps some quite niche aspects of things to fund, but also the social prescribing landscape is made up of such diverse organizations that that's part of what makes it important and special. So if we are going to have a system, it needs to get big money in there through shared investment and by linking into the system, but it also needs to have, I think you've called it before, system awareness, that it's about building the system awareness of the diverse funding options that are available and making sure that the diverse organizations that need funding are able to marry up with the right organizations. I think, yeah, that's a very interesting nuance, I think, and good to hear from the collaboration point of view. I think we are trying to catch up on time, but I want to come back with one question for a very short answer from each of the panel. But before we do that, have we got any questions from the floor? This lady here in the middle, 3 rows back.
Hi everybody, my name's Marie Polly. I co-founded the Social Prescribing Network and I'm now the co-lead on evidence at NASP, working with Professor Chatterjee sat next to me. So I have a comment and a question, if that's okay. So the comment is just picking up on your stuff about poverty and evidence. On the NASP website, there are access to 15 evidence reviews that we've done in the last couple of years. We've worked really hard. A new one out this week was poverty and older people. And in there, we have gone through the literature around the world of what activities and schemes are in place that could work for social prescribing, what the enablers, barriers, challenges and everything are, who are the key people that are in the groups, like I think Sarah, you're saying people don't want to talk about money, but actually there's a certain demographic of women of a certain age who particularly don't want to talk about money and have suffered all sorts of things. So one of the things that came out of there was co-location of services as well as co-funding. And another thing that came out was actually what you need is to work at a place level is to employ somebody that oversees that strategic working at place. So you don't expect a leader of one silo and another. You need somebody that's dedicated to understanding that locality, understanding what's already there, understanding what isn't there and needs to be there, working with the funders as you talk about shared funding, investment pots, and being more strategic. So just having that one person would be, I think, quite a game changer to do these types of things. And you've all touched on those points. My question is completely different, but my bugbear is, my bugbear is that a lot of funding is really short. It's like 6 months, 12 months, 18 months if you're lucky. And you spend 3 months getting a person in place and you've got to get them settled. Then they've got to build the relationships. They have 2 months to do their work. Then they feel that they don't know if they've got a job. So they start looking around. And we just go in this ridiculous cycle. And it's really inefficient, isn't it? Because a person spends 6 months of that 12 to 18 months not fully embedded in their job. It's a complete waste of money. So I'm probably going to come to Jacqui. What would happen if you got funding for like 5 years what would the difference be in the efficiency, the number of people you could work with, and just how would that reduce your own personal stress levels?
Quite a lot, that last bit, yeah. I would say that, yeah, I mean, our funding there is a mixture. At the moment, I'm trying not to apply for single year funding. I'm trying to only look for multi-year funding for exactly that reason, that for us, it's about the staff that are able to do the work. We are in 2 years into a 5-year lottery grant, and that for some aspect of our work, and that really has enabled. We've put that purely to an operations role, a finance role, and the rent. So all the nice stuff I will go to other charitable trusts for, but it's given me that, because the lottery agreed, it will give us that stability at the core, and then we can build the projects around that. So I think that would make a huge difference if that was the case. This is the only one that we've ever been able to go for that long. So I think it would be a massive game changer. And I might sleep.
I think I'm gonna, I've got two. Okay, man in yellowish mustard jumper and lady in
Thank you very
green
much.
jacket.
My name's Chris. I am doing a DPhil at University of Oxford at the moment. I'm a clinical academic by background with experience in primary care and public health. I like data, but I think we must be very careful about data. We must make sure that we collect meaningful data, but the data must answer questions that are considered carefully by funders. How do we make sure that funders ask amenable questions?
I think that's a very, very good question. Can we take the lady in the green jacket as well? While we're thinking about that, have you got thoughts on meaningful data gathering? Or you were talking about data, Julie, would you?
I've got a small thought about it.
Yeah.
Shall I go for it? Yeah. I think co-production is really key. So particularly with the voluntary sector, it's asking what is useful to them, but also to communities. How do they identify change happening in their communities, and then how do we recognize that, and how do we pass that on to others? So I think it's about co-production.
I think that's a big thought, but put very succinctly. I think the other person or the other agency that needs to be involved in co-production is actually the NHS. If we're looking for a system that is going to be feeding into the money in the NHS, what evidence is the NHS looking for? Lady in green jacket.
Okay, my name's Deborah. I'm from a housing association, so coming at this from a different point of view. We have a team of 60 that are very much involved in social prescribing, including 20 who are just dedicated to money bus and benefits, and they're full-time employees. I'm going to link in with the question that was asked. It's about the quality of people working in social prescribing or supporting communities. And I totally agree that this short-term funding for some organisations is more harmful than it's actually, doing good for the communities. That one of the things I've not heard as well is how you ensure that the quality of those that work is the best it can be. And you're not going to get that if you've constantly got 6 months, 12 month, 18-month funding projects. And I think it's a really important consideration for everyone here. Most of us will not be the sum of our job titles, we will be far more. And I think there needs to be an awareness that the quality of delivery needs to be maintained. It's not just about funding a project.
Right. And the investment in workforce, I think that's an important point. I was asked to finish by 12:05, so I'm not going to ask my little short question because I think the questions from the audience have been absolutely spot on. But I would just like to say thank you very much to the whole panel. I hope this is something we will discuss more in the future.